So for this video, we're going to be going through the image editing options found within Register 360 2025.0.0, as well as kind of more my typical or preferred method of image editing in third-party applications or software to then bring back into Register 360 and ultimately recolorize and update these setup images. So within your project, you can access the Edit HDR image a few different ways. You can select in your bundle, whether you're in a sitemap view or bundle cloud view, doesn't matter. You should be able to have that option there. You can also select just the setups you want to select or edit, edit HDR again, or again, if you want to just do the project as a whole for all the setups that have images, then you just select the bundle. You will have options. You can apply to just that selection, or you can apply to the project. In this case, I have the bundle selected, so it's one and the same. But I think if you had different sitemaps or multiple bundles broken out that weren't all connected together, then I think apply to project may or may not be more of a use for you. So within Register 360, you have a few options to go about editing these images. And full transparency, that's not the greatest tool for image editing, but you still have some of that basic functionality if you so desire. So within Register, you're going to have the tone map editor. So these are all 5-bracketed HDR images that it stitches together to create kind of the HDR and the SDR images. And so because they're HDR, I don't know how it all works with licensing and the different methods you can go about editing them. You have a handful of these presets. And as you click through, and you'll see the images get updated. Some are better, some are worse, but think of these as just kind of like a starting point. But in any case, if you just want to go for a preset, keep it basic, just bump some of the saturation, bump the brightness up maybe a little bit, just selecting the second from the left option. It's a pretty decent starting point. Otherwise, you have, these are all different tone mapping parameters, tone mapping methods. And I'm not by any means a professional photo editing person or know all the ins and outs and what each of these different settings mean, but just know that you have a few different tone mapping options that you can go about utilizing. For the most part, I think nearly everyone's probably just going to rely on this Reinhard method just because you're going to get the best looking, most natural photos compared to some of these other ones that are fairly extreme kind of as that starting point. So with each of these, you're going to have sliders and you're going to have this drop down. Each of these tone mapping parameters has different options just due to how the tone mapping algorithm works or whatever it is. So you can really just play with these all you want, kind of play with it much to get an image you like. You can click and drag the slider. You can just hover and scroll as well as zoom it, move it around. But then each of these different options, as you change them, if you don't like something or you just went a little too far with a few different edits, you're trying to get back to a starting point, you can just re-hit the default and it'll bring you back to kind of the basis starting point, ground zero. So again, I always kind of like to, if I'm editing within the software, I always just like to reselect a second from the left, kind of as a decent starting point, and I'll go about editing some of these options. So intensity, I think it's just kind of an average, like all the edits together, just kind of moving them all the same, because it's just, you can see it's bright, it gets darker, but that's intensity. Light adept, I think it's kind of like your highlights, mostly affects highlights. Color adept, and just kind of pulling these sliders, see where you have color more so than just black or white, kind of updates the brightness of that. Let's go back to default. Gamma, and just to show kind of what some of these sliders do to the image. Saturation, and this preset, it's basically going to be maxed out. And then you have red, green, and blue gains. Each of these, you'll just increase that color if you want to do some color correction. Generally, I've never really touched those. Brightness, I have an overall brightness for the overall image, pretty self-explanatory. And then cutoff, I think, is kind of where stuff gets blown out or it's just overexposed. I think that's what you're editing and pulling back. So again, these are some of the defaults, some of the basics, pretty basic for what you can do inside a Register. But once you're happy, you can just hit OK and it'll start to go and apply those edits to the selection or to your project, and you can go from there. So that's kind of the built-in, pretty simple. My preferred method though is utilizing third-party applications such as the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite or Lightroom or Photoshop. And so with the setups that have images, so in this data set, I have some setups that are just black and white and some handful that have actual images. If I selected everything and I went to go export image, it would spit out the color RGB images for those setups, but then the black and white setups that are just point cloud data, you're going to get a black and white image derived from the point cloud intensity return. So you'll have that option. Generally, I never edit those. No need, just black and white. But you can if you really wanted to change kind of some of the brightness or intensity values in a sense. But so again, for the setups that I would want to go and export, just to kind of show a mock little example, I would come in, select the setups or select the bundle. I'm going to go export panoramic images. And then you have your options to export just the JPEG or the SDR image, or you can do the EXR, which is the full HDR image. If you're doing full 5K image imports with RTC 360 data, these JPEGs will be anywhere from like 60 to 120 megabytes. They're about 210 megapixels each. And then the more noisy the image, the darker the environment, that'll increase the file size, getting up to 120, 130 meg size. But most often, well-lit environments, you're probably sitting around 75 megs for a single photo. EXRs, the HDR images, I think they're typically around a half a gig each. So pretty dramatic, the size difference. But EXRs, HDR, I've never edited those. I just care about the JPEGs since that's what ultimately colorizes the point cloud. But when you're exporting these, I would just typically say change these to 100% and then change the image resolution to the full 5K. So I've already got these exported, but exporting them will depend on your computer hardware. Might take anywhere from like 10, 15 seconds of setup to 30, 40 seconds of setup, depending on your computer hardware. So not too bad of a process, but you can batch export them and just let it crank. So I've already got those imported and what that looks like. So just looking at the raw images. So I didn't relabel my setup names. So these are still the default from when I imported. And so the key is you got to make sure these stay the same. So it's exporting these images, the raw ones, the unedited ones, they're going to be exactly the same as the setup name. So when you go to edit those, you need to make sure that those file names stay exactly the same. So when you go to re-import them into Register, it's not going to get tricked up and it can't find the images. And then if it can, I think it's a manual process to be like, okay, this image applies to this setup. So just know if you keep the setup names or the file names the exact same as before and after importing and exporting, it'll just work seamlessly. So here's the two photos first two setups and the photos I exported, 75, 79 megs. And so when we go, again, my preferred method is going to be to come into Adobe Lightroom. So I'm not going to go all the ins and outs of editing photos, but with this software, again, you can come in, edit them to your heart's content, to getting to what it looks like. So I'll just kind of scroll through my settings so you can copy them if you want. It kind of depends on the data set and the environment scan. Again, noisier images, sometimes manual noise reduction is a lot bigger role, especially with the color noise reduction. So just kind of have to play around with it until you get something you like. But just to kind of show the difference between the images, that's what we're working with. So again, do it as much as you want, as little as you want. If you Photoshop want to go throw in logos, you can, and that'll recolorize the point cloud with those logos. Just if you do that, try to put your logos or something, whatever it is you're going to overlay on the image or the photo, try to put it on like a flat surface and scale it to match kind of the fisheye sense that we're kind of looking at, so that when it rewraps or unwraps the photo and reapplies it to the point cloud coloring, that your logo or something doesn't get all messed up. So just takes a little practice though. So again, do your edits, go back, you export them. I typically have a raw folder and then I have an edited folder. And so again, I keep the file names the exact same. In this case, since I reduced some of the noisiness of the photos, the file size is actually slightly smaller. But again, that can change. It can go up depending on what the image looks like and what you're all doing to it and how crazy you go with the edits. But here is the edited photos, have the exact same file name. And so when it comes to re-importing them into Register, I think you have to be in the sitemap view, because if I go to bundle cloud view and I go right click on these, because the option you're looking for is re-import. So I guess you can do it from bundle cloud view. If you needed to import settings from scratch, as if you never did in the beginning, then from the sitemap view, let's see, where is it? Oh, I have to select all my individual setups. Then I have the import option, import images option, which this is from scratch, from the raw data, does it all over again. So again, this one though, we would re-import the panoramic images, and then all you got to do is just point it to the folder that has the edited photos. And then once you hit select that folder, it's going to go find those photos. It's going to go match the setup to the folder or to the image name, and then it'll recolorize the point cloud with those updated, corrected images. So pretty simple. Depending on your setup density, low, medium, high, or whatever you're doing with like a P series or some other BLK scanner, higher density setups will just take longer to re-import and recolorize, simply because you're working with more data, more points, more information. So keep that in mind. But again, doing it kind of live, you can kind of see with my computer how fast that's going. And you can kind of just watch your task manager to see as it's importing, you kind of get a judge for how fast your computer will import them based off the spikes of CPU usage. So I think this computer is anywhere from like 20 to 30 seconds of setup to re-import. Laptop might take a little bit longer. So just depends on your computer hardware, but that's really the process for exporting, editing, re-importing, and having those updates apply to the job. So yeah, if I go into setup cloud view, turn off my classification. So it's not like it's going to be super dramatic with the images. But again, the images and the corrections and the coloring are going to be the new edited photos. So, and those same colors get applied to the point cloud itself. So, generally, the only time I batch edit a lot of these photos is when I have like a final scan of a construction project, or like in wall and overhead before drywall goes in. Sometimes you can be in really dark lit environments or really bright and dark, and you're just trying to even out the photos to make most everything more easily visible. And that's kind of where the Register 360 can fall short a little bit with the imagery editing and colorization. So bringing them into third party like Lightroom, you can do a lot more with the photos and really make the point cloud a lot prettier, a lot easier to look at, as well as the images for just documentation, as built information down the road. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of editing. And at this point, even though I have edited photos back into Register, if I hit the export images again, whatever is currently loaded in the job, even if you wrote over the original files, whatever is current and actively in the job is what's going to get exported. So, and then kind of like we mentioned before, the import images option, I need to be in the sitemap view, select my setups, import images. This is going to import them in from scratch from the raw scan data. So you just need to make sure that those scans are still in the exact same file location as when you imported. If not, it's going to throw an error like I can't find the files. So you have to go point it to the correct or the updated location for those raw scan files. So, but that's, I think in a nutshell, kind of image editing, colorization options within Register 360. So with that, we'll see you on the next video.